right, welcome back. So we are going to be starting chapter 7. Now that you've done chapter 3 and you have gone over learning styles and taken the assessments of areas of intelligence that your strengths lie and your specific learning styles that you have, that you basically got your scores and you saw which ones were your highest, and also tying in your personality traits with your learning style, we're going to talk about getting engaged in class, listening skills, and then note taking. I'm not going to go over huge amounts of detail. I'm just going to kind of point to areas when you're doing your reading for chapter 7 that you should pay attention to. And then also just kind of briefly go over a little bit of information here and there. But basically, I'm going to mostly be pointing out what you need to know. Next week, you will be doing your midterm. So get prepared for that. So the chapter starts out with talking about engagement, getting engaged in class. We've all been guilty of sitting in class and zoning out and maybe not really fully getting engaged. And so as you start out your reading on page 172, it actually numbers a lot of different ways that you can think about how you can get more engaged in class, so that way you are listening better, you are taking in more of the information, and you're actually getting yourself more involved in the whole process of being in class and being able to learn better. So read through that, really take note of some of these different ideas that they're mentioning for getting engaged in class, and you will see questions about this on your midterm. So make sure you're reading through that section. It goes all the way to page 174. And then we're going to go into, it goes right in from that point to getting engaged in class, also ties into listening skills, how you can listen better, how you can listen with more focus. So that way you're actually taking in more of the information and you're actually able to learn more, and you're able to basically take better notes, because that's what we're leading into going further into the chapter. So as you're reading this section here, you're going to be completing your exercise 7.3 after you finish reading this section about listening skills. And it is going to go over the differences between what is soft listening and what is hard listening. And obviously for sitting in class and learning new concepts and learning better, you need good hard listening skills. So make sure that you're kind of reading through that section and focusing there on ways that you can listen better and you can actually retain more information. And then on page 177 to page 178, there is a section that is going to be talking about lecturers. It's going to be talking about styles of lecturing. So this is talking about your professors, because let's face it, every professor teaches a little bit differently. And sometimes some of your professors, you really can get engaged in their classes because probably the way that they are lecturing is good for you. It really, it's good for your learning style. It's good for basically how you like to do things, and you can really get engaged in some people's classes, and then in others, it's harder. And so when you're reading through this section about lecturing styles, the book is also going to give you some kind of tips on, okay, let's say you're sitting in a specific professor's class and maybe the way that they lecture is not something that you can normally get engaged and you can't listen very well because maybe it's harder for you. And it gives you some tips. Make sure you read through this section about lecturing styles and that you kind of understand the differences between them, because you are going to not only see a question about this on your midterm, but when you're doing your chapter 7 impact assignment for this week, it's going to be there. One of the questions is going to be asking you to tie in what you've learned about lecturing styles, and it's going to ask you to tie in some information from chapter 3 that you learned in your answer. So just be aware of that. And pretty much going from this section, it's going to go right into information about note-taking. Note-taking is important, even if it's something that you haven't done a lot of, or if you don't, in the past, you haven't felt like note-taking has been very valuable for you. You have to understand that note-taking, there's different ways that you can do it. It is a potential that maybe the way that you've been taking notes hasn't been a good method for you, because there are different styles of note-taking. But also what's important about what the chapter points out is that note-taking engages all of the different learning styles. And so wherever your strengths lie in your learning style, note-taking is important because it kind of hits on all of them. You have to be able to read the PowerPoint that the professor puts up for you in order to read some of that information. You have to be able to listen to the professor to get what information they're trying to give you, because a lot of times the professor is going to kind of give you clues as to, this is important, this is something you need to know for testing, this is something you need to know to be able to move on to the next concept, and things like that. Note taking, you have to write down information. So if you were kind of high in that read write area, you're writing down information, it's helping your brain remember, because that just the act of writing is something that your brain responds to if that was your learning style. But also, if you were a kinesthetic learner, the physical act of taking notes is something that's giving you a physical activity to do while you're sitting in class. And maybe some of the other ways that the professor is presenting information to you maybe is not best for your learning style, but by the act of note taking and doing something physical and trying to make yourself focus on what they're saying so you can write down information, it's actually helping you for your learning style. So that's kind of something important that the book points out, is that note taking is hitting on pretty much every learning style. And so that's why it's important for people to take notes, because it's going to help you retain information. It's going to help you studying later on if you use your notes to study, which you should. If you're one of those people that take notes and then you put it in your folder and then you never use your notes again, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice, because your notes could potentially be one of your best study aids that you have. And it's also, if you learn how to take good notes, you don't necessarily, when it comes time to take a test, you don't have to go back and reread the chapters because you don't remember information. If you took really good notes, you could potentially review your notes and really help yourself remember more information that way. So this is an important chapter, especially if people have not found value in note-taking in the past. So basically, as you're kind of getting to this point, I'm on page 181 now. And it's talking, now we're going to talk about the different note-taking styles. It goes into, in the beginning, note-taking by the subject, and it actually gives you some good pointers on ways that you could potentially maximize and take notes depending on what it is, what subject it is that you're learning. Like if you're in a math class, or if you're in science or English or anything like that. And it kind of gives you some goals for note-taking. So if you've had issues with note-taking in the past and that's not something that you found a lot of value in, read through this section. I'm on page 182 now, where it's talking about goals for note-taking. It's going to give you an idea of this is what you should be shooting for when you're taking your notes. And read through that section, because it's going to give you a lot of pointers and tips there. And then it's basically rolling right into the different styles of note-taking. And you're probably going to notice as you read through this part, you'll probably notice which one of these note-taking styles is most like what you've always done. Most people in general do the outlining method. That's just kind of the one. I know that's what I was taught when I was in high school. And that's the way that I always took notes. But it's going to go into some others like the Cornell system, and then it's going to go into mind maps. And so those are just a couple of other ways that potentially, depending on your strengths and your learning style, one of these other ways might be a little more something that might actually be better for you and help you remember more information, help you take better notes. So definitely read through it. And you're going to see when you're in the chapter, it's actually, if you aren't sure what that note-taking method looks like, it's actually going to give you examples of what it looks like, how to take down the main ideas, and how to actually do that note-taking style. So make sure you know the difference between the different note-taking styles, because you are going to see questions about that on the midterm. And also be aware too, the one thing I do point out to people for mind mapping, because a lot of people don't necessarily do that in their notes, but if you are one of those folks that, excuse me, scored higher in like the visual learning area, this might be something, even if you like doing outlining, this might be something that you could potentially do within your notes to help you have more of a visual of how the different concepts that you're learning are tying together. So definitely look at that if you were one of those folks that scored higher in the visual area of the VARC learning style assessment last week. And it kind of goes into more information, because it talks about note-taking by the subject. It talks about note-taking, let's say if you have the type of professor that hands out PowerPoint notes and you can actually take notes on that. Not a lot of people do that anymore, because a lot of colleges are very concerned with the cost of printing and things like that. So you may not have professors that give you an actual packet with like the PowerPoint slides on it that you can write on. But there may still be some that do that. And then it goes into the last part when it's talking about note-taking. It talks about note-taking by the book. That's an actually really important thing that a lot of people don't do. And it never even occurred to me when I was in college that I could have done that. And I probably could have helped myself a lot, because I did have some professors that were very, very much about reading the book, and they gave you some information in class, but they were expecting you to read your textbook to get most of the information. And if I'm just reading the textbook and I'm not doing anything, like I used to highlight in my textbook different things as I was going through, but it never occurred to me to actually take notes while I was reading my chapters. Because if I was sitting there and I'm reading a section and I got some main ideas and I was highlighting it in my book, it was hard for me to go back and actually look through even the highlighted information to really conceptualize all of these different topics that I was trying to remember and memorize and learn about. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I've been sick, so I apologize. But note taking by the book is a really cool method that you could start doing potentially, especially if it's a tough class where you know you have to do a lot of textbook reading and you want to be able to remember a lot of the information, take it down, and also be able to review that information later. I would recommend trying this note-taking method. And you can read more about it in the textbook to get some information. And be aware that when we get to the point that we're discussing chapter 6, I'm going to actually, your main assignment for that chapter is going to be note-taking by the book. So make sure you read that section and kind of understand what it is that I'm talking about there, because you're actually going to be doing it in that chapter, and I will explain more when we get to that point. But that's something that you're going to be practicing, because if nobody's ever tried that before, I want everyone to try it to kind of see what it looks like, to see what it's like to actually read your chapter and take down notes while you're reading, and almost like you were sitting in a class, but you're actually doing it yourself. You're learning these concepts and you're organizing it in a way that's good for you. And then the last part of the chapter talks about the importance of asking questions in class. And that's on page 191 where it starts. And this is just basically, it's a really good pointer. It's common sense, but a lot of times for some reason don't want to ask questions in class when they're confused, maybe because they don't want everybody to focus on them. Maybe in their own head, they're telling themselves, oh my God, if I ask this question, like everybody's going to look at me. Maybe they all understand it and I don't. But it's important because it's basically talking about taking charge of your own learning. Because if you're in a class and you're confused and you don't understand something, if you don't raise your hand and ask a question and ask for clarification, or maybe ask your professor if they could explain it in a slightly different way that maybe might be more understandable for you, you're doing yourself a disservice, because you need that information. You need it to probably be able to not only understand and move on to the next step in the concepts that you're learning in class, but you might not be able to study well if you're not really understanding what it is that the professor is telling you. And it's going to be harder for you to be able to kind of move on throughout the class if you're not willing to take charge and ask questions when you don't understand something. And some people are comfortable with that, but there are a lot of people that are not. And it kind of goes into information to kind of help you, internalize and understand, okay, it is okay for me to ask questions. It is okay, even if everybody's looking at me and even if I'm scared that everybody's going to be judging me because I don't understand this. It is important. It's your education. You're paying for it. You are taking the time to go to college and learn, and you want to do well. So it's okay to ask those questions. That's your right. That's what you should do. You should ask questions if you're not sure about something, even if you kind of think you understand it, but you want to be 100% sure that you're understanding the concepts. Ask the questions. Because you know what's likely is it's likely that people sitting around you probably have the same question you do, and they're also afraid to raise their hands and ask the questions. So you might be saving some other people by getting the professor to explain something in a different way that's going to be helpful for other people as well. And then the very, very last part of the chapter goes over a really important topic that I wish I would have known when I was in college, because it was something that I did not do. And it's talking about ways to use your lecture notes after you've done all of your note taking. A lot of people take their notes, they shove them in their folder, and they never look at them again, or they don't do anything with them to make them more useful when it comes time to study and to actually remember and learn these concepts and really make them concrete. A lot of people don't do these things, and they're really, really good tips that I always kind of go over, because I wish I would have done them when I was in college, because I think it would have actually been beneficial to me, and I probably would have learned much more, and it would have made studying and actually trying to memorize and really get that information to stick in my brain. It probably would have worked for me a lot better if I had known these things and done them. And the first one, it's got 3 of them. The first one is talking about manipulating your notes. So maybe you're sitting in class and maybe you're scribbling out all your notes, you're writing all these things out, and maybe the reason that you don't look at your notes later is because when you go back and you look at your notes, it's just a mess because you were trying to write down as fast as you could all of the information. And now when you're going back to try to read through your notes, they're not clear. They're not legible in a way that you might as well just read the chapter again because you probably, just tried to write down your notes as quickly as possible and they're scribbled out, or, maybe your professor jumped around in topics. And so the way that you're reading through it, it's not making sense to you. So manipulating your notes is something that you can do. You could do this after class. You can basically, a lot of people choose to rewrite their notes and they write them out to where they have the time to actually write everything out clearly, legibly, so it's really easy to read. A lot of people will go back through their notes and they'll highlight all of the main topics, and they'll highlight some of the bullet points and things that the professor pointed out as really important. So it draws your eye and it kind of makes you go back when you're reviewing your notes and go, okay, that was something really important they talked about, and I need to make sure I memorize this. A lot of people do things like flashcards. They'll take the information, main ideas, they'll make flashcards. That's basically called manipulating your notes. And some people do these things, but some people don't. So it's good to point it out just in case, that's something that you've never tried before. It might be helpful to you to go back, reorganize your notes, make it make sense to you. And the next one is paraphrasing. A lot of people don't realize that, maybe the way that your professor explained it, yes, it made sense in class, but later on when you're going back to review your notes, it's really a good idea, even if you just want to write off to the side, like maybe you're reading about a concept and the way that the professor explained it to you, but you're writing off to the side in your notes. When you're paraphrasing, you're going to take that concept and you're going to write it in your own words, the way that you think, how you talk. And it's going to make more sense to you. It's going to basically make your notes more useful for you by putting it in your own words. So read through it and you're going to really find that you're going to go, okay, I actually understand this concept and I'm writing it out in my own words, the way that I would say it, the way that I would explain it to someone. And if you think about paraphrasing, think about it like, okay, you took down all your notes in class, and let's say your friend is also in your class and they missed class that day. Your friend comes to you and asks you, okay, what did we talk about in class? Can you explain to me some of the stuff that we talked about? Well, more than likely, when you're going through all the different concepts and topics that your professor talked about, you're not going to say it exactly the way that your professor said it. You're going to explain it to your friend the way that you talk, the way that you think, and how you understood it. That's basically paraphrasing. You're putting it in your own words. So think about it in that sense. If you do decide to go back and manipulate your notes to kind of try to make them more understandable and useful for you, think about paraphrasing a lot of those concepts that you wrote down and putting them in your own words, just like you would explain to someone else in your own words what you went over, what those concepts were, what the topic was, any of the details about it. So paraphrasing is a really cool tool that you could use that could potentially make your notes more useful for you. And then the very last thing it talks about is summarizing. So after you've written your notes in class, it's really a good tool to try to summarize so you can really see what it is that you remembered, what it is that you understood about the concepts. If you just write yourself a small, paragraph at the very end of your notes after class is over, write out a small paragraph and just go, basically, it's a summary of everything that you learned. What is it that you remembered? What is it that stood out to you? What was it that was important? What was it that, the main idea of the whole entire lecture? Write a short summary about it. And it's going to basically call your attention to areas that maybe you didn't understand. It's going to call to areas that you really did understand, and you're able to actually write a good summary about it. And if you're struggling and you aren't able to write a good summary about it, it's kind of calling your attention to, okay, this was maybe a topic or the way it was explained. There's gaps, there's things that are missing, and it's going to help call attention to things that you may need to go back and review, or when you're going back and manipulating your notes, you're making sure that you're paraphrasing some of that stuff, putting it in your own words and making it more understandable for you. So those are 3 things about using your lecture notes that are potentially useful, and hopefully some of you will maybe try doing some of these things. And then other than that, that's pretty much the end of the chapter. So just some of those things that I pointed out, the different note-taking styles, make sure you understand the differences in them, because you're going to see questions about that on your midterm. You'll see questions on your midterm about getting engaged in class, the difference in listening skills between soft listening, hard listening, and then kind of some of these concepts about how to use your notes, ways that you can make your notes more useful for you. And then so basically next week we will be doing chapter 9, and then we will be doing your midterm. And just a little side information about your midterm. Your midterm is going to be in two parts. You're going to have the main midterm that's going to be the questions that will be multiple choice and true false. It is timed. If you start your midterm next week, just be aware that the time keeps running. You can't log off and log back in later. Basically, when you're ready to take your midterm, sit down and give yourself that full 60 minutes to be able to take your midterm, because it is timed and it's not going to be able to be paused. You can use your book, obviously, because you're going to be at home. Your test is going to be on Canvas. So you're going to be taking it right there in Canvas. You don't have to go to the testing center or anything like that. And then the other part of the midterm is going to be a discussion question, but it's a midterm essay. And you're going to have two choices, and you can basically choose which one you want to write about as your midterm essay question. In general, try to be aware of your grammar, your spelling. Just try your best to kind of put your thoughts together in, a cohesive way. Try to remember your periods, your capitalization at the beginning of your sentences, commas, things like that. Try your best to focus on that, because it's good practice. Even though this isn't an English class, it's still good practice. And then you'll be able to choose which one. And just please, when you are doing your midterm essay question, use information from the book to help back up what it is that you're trying to say about your essay question, because it's going to make your essay question, your answer better. But it also shows me that you are understanding and taking information and topics and explaining it in a way that basically you are utilizing that information from your textbook to basically help back up your answer. Probably hear my children in the background, and I apologize. I'm glad this lecture is over now because they're starting to get crazy. But anyway, that's basically how the midterm is going to go. You will have chapter 9 to do, so I do recommend next week that you do all of your chapter 9 reading and then your exercises, and then take your midterm, so that way you have that information also fresh in your mind. Other than that, just send me emails if you have any questions, and that is it for this week. All right.